Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. We hope you enjoyed the flight. We are now beginning our approach into San Francisco International Airport, with landing expected in about 30 minutes at approximately 11:30 a.m. local time. Weather conditions in San Francisco are clear, and the temperature is 17 degrees Celsius. Thank you for choosing Asiana Airlines, a proud member of Star Alliance. We wish you a pleasant stay in San Francisco and hope to welcome you again soon. Asiana Airlines Flight 214 is now on its final approach after a long journey from South Korea. On board, 307 passengers and crew members are expecting a routine touchdown at one of America's busiest airports. The skies are clear, visibility is excellent, and everything appears normal. But within minutes, the flight crew will encounter unforeseen challenges that will test their judgment and flying skills. This is the story of Asiana Airlines Flight 214. On the morning of July 6, 2013, the Boeing 777 operating Flight 214 was preparing to land at San Francisco International Airport. The Boeing 777 is widely respected as one of the safest and most dependable aircraft in commercial aviation. Until this day, Asiana Airlines also had a strong safety record. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was calm as passengers prepared for landing. Many looked out the windows to admire the clear skies and scenic views as the jet descended. This flight was operated by 4 pilots. Captain Lee Kang-gook, who was still in training on the Boeing 777, had 9,700 flight hours, but only 43 hours on this specific aircraft type. He was acting as the pilot flying. First Officer Lee Jong-min, an experienced instructor with more than 12,000 hours, served as the pilot monitoring. A relief captain and relief first officer were also present and had handled the controls during the cruise phase, which is standard on long international flights to ensure proper rest for the crew. However, according to their internal body clocks, it felt like nighttime for the pilots because they were still aligned with South Korea time. This likely reduced their alertness and impacted their decision-making. After nearly 10 hours in the air, the crew received clearance for a straight-in visual approach to runway 28 left. Weather conditions were ideal, light wind and 10 miles of visibility. Runway 28 left is long and wide, designed to support large aircraft such as the Boeing 777. Normally, the runway is supported by an instrument landing system, ILS, which uses radio signals to guide aircraft along the correct approach path. The localizer provides left-right alignment, while the glide slope gives vertical guidance to keep the aircraft on the correct descent angle. On this particular day, however, the glide slope for runway 28 left was out of service. This required the pilots to manually maintain the proper descent profile without automated vertical guidance. Only the localizer was available for horizontal alignment. At the same time, the flight was sponsored by BetterHelp, the world's largest online therapy service. Advertisement. BetterHelp provides easy access to licensed therapists through phone, video, or messaging. If you ever feel your assigned therapist isn't the right fit, you can switch easily at no extra cost. Visit BetterHelp.com/aircraft investigation to receive a special discount on your first month. Returning to the flight, Captain Lee, the pilot flying, had little experience landing the 777 without ILS assistance and had never performed a manual visual approach into San Francisco. Though he felt uneasy, he did not express his concerns, possibly due to cultural norms that discourage questioning authority in hierarchical environments. At 11:12 a.m., 15 minutes before landing, the relief first officer returned to the cockpit. The descent checklist had already been completed. The crew continued descending, and approach control instructed them to intercept a straight-in visual approach to runway 28 left. 9 minutes later, air traffic control asked whether they had the airport in sight. The pilots confirmed, and they were cleared for a visual approach. At this moment, the aircraft was descending through 6,300 feet at 211 knots, with flaps up and gear up. The autopilot was set to FLCH SPD mode, which adjusts pitch to maintain selected airspeed. Meanwhile, the autothrottle was in hold mode, meaning engine thrust would remain unchanged unless pilots moved the throttles manually. At 11:23, the aircraft intercepted the localizer at 4,800 feet. The pilot flying ordered flaps 1, and the first officer confirmed. ATC then instructed them to slow to 180 knots until 5 miles out. The pilot flying complied and requested flaps 5. However, leaving the autopilot in FLCH SPD mode made it difficult to simultaneously reduce speed and maintain descent, causing the plane to drift above the ideal glide path. The crew could have used speed brakes to steepen the descent, but chose not to. This was the first sign things were going wrong. Still above the glide path, the pilot flying switched to VS mode and set a descent rate of -1,000 FPM. This required the pilots to manually keep an eye on airspeed, something they later failed to do consistently. The relief first officer reminded them they still hadn't slowed to 180 knots. The aircraft remained too fast. At 8.5 miles out, the captain ordered the landing gear down. Although the gear extension increased drag, it was not enough to regain the proper glide path. He did not request flaps 20, which could have helped further. The aircraft was now 900 feet too high. Realizing this, the captain increased descent to -1,500 FPM. After 20 seconds, however, they inexplicably reduced it back to -1,000 FPM, still too shallow to recover. At 11:25, the aircraft crossed waypoint Duyet at 2,250 feet, 450 feet higher than required. As they descended through 1,900 feet, the pilot called for flaps 20 and reduced target speed to 152 knots. He then attempted to select flaps 30, but the aircraft was still going too fast for that setting. Struggling to manage altitude and speed, the captain switched the autopilot back to FLCH SPD mode without announcing it, against procedures. The autopilot responded by pitching up, while the autothrottle advanced thrust to climb, creating a conflict. The pilot disconnected the autopilot and pulled the thrust levers to idle, accidentally keeping autothrottle stuck in hold mode. From this point onward, the aircraft's speed dropped uncontrollably, but the pilots did not notice. At 1,000 feet, they were still high, but now slowing dangerously. During visual approaches, Asiana had an informal habit of turning off only the pilot flying's flight director, not both. If both had been turned off, the autothrottle would have gone back to speed mode and corrected airspeed. This mistake allowed the speed to fall rapidly. At 500 feet, a critical decision height, the approach was unstable, and they should have gone around. They did not. At 200 feet, the jet was below the glide path, with 4 red PAPI lights showing, and airspeed at 122 knots. Far too low. At 100 feet, speed dropped to 103 knots. The stall warning, stick shaker, activated. The first officer pushed the throttles forward for go-around power, but it was too late. The engines began to spool up, but the aircraft was already sinking toward the seawall. At 11:27 a.m., the tail of Flight 214 struck the seawall before the runway. The tail broke off, several passengers were ejected, and the aircraft slid and spun before stopping in the grass. Most passengers escaped using emergency slides. The investigation concluded that the crash was mainly caused by poor management of speed and altitude, failure to monitor key flight instruments, lack of experience with manual visual approaches, miscommunication, over-reliance on automation, failure to execute a go-around. Despite the severity of the crash, 304 of the 307 people on board survived, though 3 passengers died. The accident led to major changes in pilot training, especially regarding manual flying skills and visual approaches without ILS support. This tragedy remains a powerful reminder of the importance of situational awareness, communication, and proper use of cockpit automation.